Since my aspiration here is just to show up and never do any work, he's agreed to do the work today. But he also is a true expert in the K through 12 education arena. Somebody who, as you know, the Lair News Hour has covered everything, and Ray has covered everything. But he's distinguished himself in so many fields, including the coverage of education. Ray, thanks for doing this, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, gee, thanks, Walter. I believe you're up first on the program, Mr. Mayor. But if you want to give me back the time, that's okay. I'm sure we'll make good use of it.
Yeah. Whatever. I'm with you.
All right. Well, I think for the purposes of this conversation, Walter, really my qualifications have more to do with being a District of Columbia taxpayer and a D.C. public schools parent than being a celebrity or famous. The mayor has been in the job about 7 weeks now. Graduate of Dunbar High and George Washington University. And during your time in office, we got the news that after decades of decline, after 5 straight censuses of decline, the district population is up above 600,000 again for the first time in a long time. The OOs, the aughts, whatever you want to call them, were years of growth. People were staying here and moving here. And so maybe you have a stronger hand to play, a better tax base, good news, instead of people picking the various places they are loading up the moving trucks to head to. Why did you want to be mayor in the first place?
I'm struck by the fact that people laughed when you asked that question. I wanted to be mayor because I absolutely love the District of Columbia. I'm a native Washingtonian. I am a product of the public schools of this city. I went to undergraduate and graduate school here in the District of Columbia, and my life in one form or fashion has been devoted largely to public service. Not all in the public sector, mind you, but substantially to public service. I spent a number of years as the executive director of the Association for Retarded Citizens, in which we took on the cause of essentially reforming how services were provided to people who now are referred to as folks with intellectual or cognitive disabilities. Worked to close an institution. We were the second state, if I'll be permitted to call us a state. Hope we can do that in reality one day. But we worked to close the institution. We were only the second state to be able to accomplish that, and started to reform fundamentally how services were delivered to that population. I worked for 4 years as the Director of Human Services. Spent several years as the Executive Director of Covenant House. Actually was the founding director because I wanted to work with young people who were very challenged. The older group, nobody wanted to work with them, and it was a challenge that I wanted to take on. And frankly, that is pretty much what's defined my life, and that is wanting to be able to do something meaningful and not something that was necessarily easy. So I've certainly found that opportunity, haven't I? In any event, I got into politics fairly late in my career. I ran for the Ward 7 council seat, which I was sworn in 2005, because there were people who urged me to do that in my own ward, because I live in Ward 7, obviously. And then people urged me to run for the council during my first year on the council, because people started running for everything. And they came to me and said, what do you think about running for, I'd been in office for 9 months. They said, what do you think about running for the chair seat? I said, what do you think about mental health intervention? Somebody who's been here for 9 months, it seemed to make absolutely no sense to me. So I did it because I thought I could do the job and make a difference, and I did that for 4 years, and along came the opportunity to run for this seat. In substantial part, I did it because I believe that I think this is the greatest city in the world, and I want to be a part of helping to continue to pursue that quest and to make that reality in the minds of people around the world.
I think it's fair to say that being the mayor of this city is unlike being mayor of any other city in America, but not for the reasons that you can obviously talk about, the presence of the federal government and so on. This is a peculiar place in the way it's set up, in its laws of governance, in who holds the purse strings, in the places where home rule extends and where it doesn't. Is it tougher than being mayor of another city? Do you hold your fate in your hands as much as Michael Bloomberg or now Rahm Emanuel?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's quite evident. First of all, it is the toughest job of any city in America, in my opinion, in substantial part because we are state, county, municipality all rolled into one. If you look at the programs that we run, those programs in other places are run variously by the state, by a county, or by a city. We have all of those embedded in our own government. And then, ironically enough, we have virtually, I won't say we have no control, but we have very limited control over decision-making. One need only look at what's happened in recent weeks with the decision-making on the Hill. With the new Republican majority, we've now been told that we are going to be, potentially, we're going to be prohibited from spending our money, the dollars we raise in the District of Columbia, on a needle exchange program, which we know has been effective around the country in helping to stem the rising tide of the epidemic around HIV and AIDS. We have been told that we won't be able to spend our money on providing abortions to needy women. And irrespective of where you stand on the issue, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, that's not the question. The question is, shouldn't we be able to make the decisions about how our funds are deployed? And we've also been told that we will once again have the door opened to having a voucher program in the District of Columbia. And again, irrespective of where you stand on vouchers, I think that's the decision that ought to be made by the people of the District of Columbia. So there are enormous expectations of a leader in this city, and frankly, you don't have the same tools as someone else does in a similar leadership capacity around the country to be able to make those decisions. Interestingly enough, if you look at the laws that are made in this city, we have something that is quite unique here. It's called an emergency and temporary process. For those of you who follow the legislative process here, first of all, I recommend you get a life. But secondly, it is really jury-rigged in a way to be able to accommodate the difficulty that we have, because all of our budget decisions are not finalized until they go to the Hill, and the legislation that is passed in this city is not finalized until it goes to the Hill. Where if it's a civil law, it's 30-day layover. If it's criminal, it's a 60-day layover. So we have this emergency and temporary process. And the purpose of that is, after a bill is passed in this city, so that we can move forward, we adopt emergency legislation, which is effective for 90 days, and then temporary legislation, which is effective for 225 days. And the purpose of that is to compensate for these oftentimes interminable periods when our legislation is in a layover on the Hill. Rarely is it actually 30 or 60 days because it's 30 or 60 legislative days. We've had bills that have been up there as long as 9 months before they've been approved. We had a bill that took 9 months to get approved that did the following, that changed the term handicapped to disability. Now that's earth-shattering, isn't it?
Well, let me return then to my original question. Why would you want to be mayor? If it's set up, if a system is set up in a way that even with your best efforts, creating coalitions, figuring out how to thread the needle, devising with advisors the best approach toward solving one or another of the city's problems, if you can't get it done, or if worse than that, the system seems created to make it impossible to get it done, why would you want to be mayor?
Because I think it needs to change. And there have to be people who step up and are willing to make the sacrifices to help lead that change. I do believe that there's a very strong argument to be made for us to be the 51st state. Is that going to happen tomorrow, next week, or next month, or even on my watch? Probably not. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make the argument and that we shouldn't try to move the ball down the field with respect to effectuating that. I talk to people constantly about the fact that we pay $3.6 billion in federal taxes in the District of Columbia. We send, our relatives off to fight wars in faraway places in Afghanistan and Iraq, to fight for democracy elsewhere when people don't enjoy it when they come home. We serve on federal juries, just like other people do. In point of fact, we do all the things that are required of Americans. And I think it's time, if you pay your dues, you ought to be able to get a membership card. So I want to be a part of helping to make that case and help to bring about change. Again, the change that has occurred has been, frankly, rather gradual. You look at the fact that we finally got a congressperson back in 1972, some limited home rule in 1975. We thought we were going to get voting rights for Congresswoman Norton a couple of years ago, and unfortunately there was an amendment that was attached to the bill that was a poison pill, in my opinion, and that was stripping away the gun control laws in the District of Columbia and then mandating that our legislative body never again would be able to legislate on guns, which was a deal breaker for me. But for me, I think it's worth the battle. You look at where battles have been fought elsewhere against seemingly insurmountable odds, and oftentimes those odds have proven to be surmountable. Go back to the Civil Rights Movement. There were people at a point in this country who thought there would be no way that those obstacles would be overcome. And there were leaders who stepped up and made sacrifices, sometimes the ultimate sacrifice of their life, to be able to win freedom. There are 119 nations capitals in the free world, and we are the only one that doesn't have a vote in this national legislative body. So as frustrating as this may be, as gradual as it may be, I think it is a battle that is worth waging, and that's why I want to be in the mix, and I want to be able to help provide leadership to make this happen.
When I was living in the district only a short time, this was still a fairly abstract proposition to me, I have to say. When I moved here from Chicago, people said, hey, you're not going to have a member of Congress, and I thought, big deal. Yet, what changed me on that was the threat from the District of Columbia Committee of the House of Representatives not to allow the district to hold a referendum on medical marijuana, and when that didn't work, threatening to prevent the vote from being counted, which that's the kind of thing that happens in some banana republic somewhere. Mm-hmm. And I thought, now I get the difference. Now I get the difference between living in a real place and living in this sort of frankly odd institution where a guy elected by the people of Alabama, good people I'm sure, send him to Congress, and he sits on a committee where he can say that my vote doesn't count, which I found just odd. And that brought me on side for good, I think. I pay taxes, you pay taxes,
that's right.
And we have a different set of rights from people who pay taxes elsewhere
or no
in
rights.
the country.
Or no rights. Again, I look at the circumstances that we live under here. There is no place else in America where anybody would have the chutzpah to stand up and say, I'm going to put my hand in your pocket, find out how much money you have there, and then I'm going to tell you how to spend it. That would not happen anywhere else in America. This whole issue with the needle exchange, the whole issue with abortions for needy women, the whole issue around vouchers, some of the things that are done here, folks would not even do in their home districts. And again, I think it's a question of, to what extent will the people say enough is enough in the city? It amazes me. There are statehood rallies that are held here, and you get 50 people, 75 people, and I think it's time for folks to really to start to pay attention to our own disenfranchisement. And I don't know what the ultimate solution is in terms of the best strategies for this. But frankly, educating people about our plight is a great start. And there are a variety of reasons that are cited, not the least of which is, we have such a transient population that maybe people really don't care. I don't think I buy that one. I don't think the population here is as transient as often is represented to be. I think there are a lot of people who have made their investment in the District of Columbia, intend to stay here, and I haven't seen any data that would suggest our population is any more transient than anywhere else. I think it's an issue of getting people to believe that change can occur and that they can be the change.
In the last 20 years, we've had mayors of different dispositions, different ways of presenting that very case to the public and to the Congress, yet the tone that you get in response hasn't changed that much. It's a kind of mixture of condescension and contempt, which I really don't understand entirely, still, after being here all these years. I don't understand where that comes from, but it's dripping from the pronouncements that you hear from, for instance, the D.C. committee in the House about the way this place is run, who lives here, and how it does its day-to-day business. Can you change this? This is called the Aspen Leadership Series. You're the leader. How do you turn around something that seems so deeply rooted in this unusual relationship between a city and the Congress?
Well, I think if I'm left to be the only person to help make that case with the 535 people on the Hill, I think there's no way it will change. I think it's got to be like so many movements have been historically, and that it has got to come from the people. It's got to come from people who live in the city who say that enough is enough, that we believe that change should occur, and a willingness to stand up and speak on that, and a willingness to stand up and fight for it. Again, it is amazing to me that after all these years, we still see people who seem to be resigned to the plight that we experience in the city. I will say this: this has been a dispiriting, time for those of us who would have liked to view us as moving forward. The election in November with the Republican majority, and then some of the steps that have been taken. Again, one always wants to see some light at the end of the tunnel. But the gentleman from South Carolina, who is chairing the Oversight Committee for the District of Columbia, actually reached out, and instead of having me come over to the Hill, to his office, I was pleased with the fact that he came over to the Wilson building and sat down. Now, ultimately what counts is his vote. I understand that. But certainly it is a far more constructive climate than I've seen in many instances in the past. And one of the questions he asked me was, who in your opinion, because he's a freshman, he said, who in your opinion has done the best job in the past of this kind of oversight? Because I want to talk to that person, and I'd like to be able to emulate them. So,
Did you even have a name, though?
Well, I actually went to the Appropriations Committee, and the Appropriations person that I cited was Jose Serrano, who I thought did an absolutely sterling job. He came over to the Wilson building as well, other than Congresswoman Norton. These two men are the only two people who come over there, certainly during my time. And one of the things that Congressman Serrano would say repeatedly, he says, I'm the only person in the Congress of the United States who wants to relinquish power. And his point was that I'd like to give up the oversight responsibility for the District of Columbia because we now see that you've earned, you've achieved legislative autonomy, you've achieved budget autonomy. The question for us, and I don't know the answer to this, is this going to be an incremental? These are going to be incremental gains like budget autonomy, like legislative autonomy, like voting rights, or is there going to be a groundswell that says let's go from 0 to 100 because we want to become a state? We can figure out how to carve out the residential presence in the District of Columbia, and therefore there's a federal presence, and there's that, and here we are. But I don't think that this, again, I don't think it'll change overnight, but I don't think there will be a status quo situation here in the years ahead.
We've been talking about the district looking out to the rest of the country and to Capitol Hill. Let's talk about looking inward. This is, even in a country with wide gaps between rich and poor, as wide as we have, also an unusual place in the stark differences between parts of the city. You have some neighborhoods that through good times and terrible times have remained mired in poverty, and at the same time one of the highest per capita incomes as a jurisdiction in the United States. 25% of all adults over 25 have a graduate degree. 46% of all adults over 25 have a 4-year college degree, yet 1/3, by one estimate, of the citizens of the district are functionally illiterate. Those are stunning gaps and really speak to two cities, which became a very important part of your successful campaign in the fall. How do you bind up a place like that? How do you get the 46% with the 4-year degrees, the people who are driving that high family income level, to care about the other ones?
Well, I don't want to take the position that they don't care. I think they do. I think people do make investments in the city and they want to see results. And that's one of the reasons why I ran on the theme of one city. And that is, I believe that there is concern from one side of the city to the other. Now we have this kind of Dickens, experience where we do essentially have two cities. And the further west you go, the more opulence you find. The further east you go, the more economic challenge you find. And I happen, by the way, to live in one of those eastern wards. I happen to live in Ward 7. And one of the jobs I think we have, or two of the jobs that we have, is one, to be able to continue an aggressive pursuit of education reform. Because that is the great emancipator. That is the great liberator. And that is, if you can educate people and give people the tools to compete, ipso facto, you will have a changed set of circumstances. And then secondly, we've got to bring economic development opportunity to the eastern end of the city. And those two, in my opinion, are inextricably tied. I live in a ward that has 70,000 people, and we just doubled the number of sit-down restaurants in my ward from 1 to 2. You have a similar experience in Ward 8. And one of the things that I have as one of my priorities is being able to use the economic levers that we have on the eastern end of the city to try to lift up the boats. One of those, frankly, is the Department of Homeland Security coming to the St. Elizabeth's campus. It will be the biggest construction project in America, not just the District of Columbia, in America. They will occupy the entire west side of the St. Elizabeth's campus. We had expectations that there would be a 750,000 square foot FEMA building that would be built on the east side, which the district owns. That now has been put on hold because of these budget negotiations at the federal level. But what that will bring with it will be 14,000 permanent jobs. It will bring with it 22,000 construction jobs. But for me, more importantly than that, because I think there's going to be a lot of difficulty for the people who are chronically unemployed in the city to be able to qualify for those jobs. What I think it will do is bring economic opportunity to the city. Small businesses are the lifeblood of business in the District of Columbia. And if we do this right, and we've been working, when I met with the president back in December, this was the first thing on my agenda. And I said, Mr. President, have you ever been to Ward 8? And he said, yes. He said, I've been to parts of Anacostia, and it was very evident that he knew what he was talking about when we engaged in that discussion. But what we need to do is make sure that we don't wind up with a federal enclave where people simply go in there during the daytime or whenever they work, and they leave at night, and they have no relationship to the surrounding community. We are working assiduously to prevent them from developing amenities on that campus. We don't want a bunch of cafeterias and banks and cleaners developed on that campus because it will simply encourage people never to come off until they have to go home. People tend to frequent the amenities that are in their area if they are available. We want to use, and I had this conversation with Secretary Napolitano of Homeland Security, and the first thing she said in the conversation was, we want to make sure that we have a community presence as we come to St. Elizabeth's. That is a lever that we can use to start to lift up boats. It will facilitate the development of additional housing. It will bring additional jobs there, and frankly, it will bring jobs that even people who may not be as literate as they or we would like them to be will have an opportunity to fill service jobs. And again, you look at the opportunity for green jobs. We now have probably the most aggressive building standards in the nation. We have more LEED certified buildings. We have 123 LEED certified buildings in the District of Columbia. More per capita than anywhere else in the nation, and second only then in the number of LEED certified buildings that we have. And some of them now are moving to the next level, and that is moving to not just silver, but moving to the gold level. There are jobs that will be created out of that. There are weatherization jobs. There are green roofing jobs. There are green electrical jobs that will be created, green plumbing jobs that will be created. And those jobs do not require a protracted period to be prepared for them. Weatherization. Anybody know how long it takes to be prepared to get a job in weatherization, to be competent to be able to do it? 2 weeks. And we are now stepping up our efforts to be able to address that. One of the things that the government can do, is very hard for governments to create jobs, but we can understand how we provide the levers for economic development, and then we can tool ourselves to make sure we have people who are coming through the pipeline. We have a brand new Department of Employment Services director, and I'm very excited, Dr. Rochelle Webb, who came here from Arizona. And I said, Dr. Webb, there are two things that you just have to do, and that is you have got to be able to provide the leadership to create a workforce development system in the District of Columbia, which we have never really had. And the second thing is you got to be able to retool the summer youth employment program so that kids do radical things like work when they come to the job every day, or show up on time, or show up every day, or get along with the people who are there. A workforce development system at a minimum has got to be able to involve whatever the leadership agency is in employment services, but it's got to involve the schools. And the schools have to understand, as they build career and technical education programs, what are those career and technical education programs connected to? They have to be connected to what we think the emerging economy is in this city. And we did something. I see Donald Graham back there. He and I had a little conversation about this a while back. And that is, I'm very excited to have played a role in creating the first ever community college in the District of Columbia. We have, in the 18 short months that this college has been open, we have 2,600 students. And what they are doing is continuing education, they are doing remedial education, but even more than that, they are attuning themselves to the job market as it is evolving in this city. They now have curricula in healthcare. Anybody know how many jobs we have in healthcare in the city? 30,000 jobs. And by the way, just so you know, it isn't the absence of jobs necessarily that is the problem in this city. There were 25,000 new jobs that were created in the District of Columbia last year. The problem is the disconnect that exists between the skill sets required and the skill sets of those who are chronically unemployed. So it isn't an absence of jobs in the city. In fact, we now have 70% of the jobs filled in this city by people who live outside the District of Columbia, which is an astounding number. By the way, not to digress, but that goes back to the whole issue about our own autonomy and self-determination, because if we had the authority like others do to tax income at its source, we would obviously be able to have a better control over our future financial fate. That money all leaves every day and is taxed wherever those people live, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, or in some cases, with some of our first responders, they live as far away as Ohio. So in any event, the relationship between economic development and education and working to make that happen, I think has a real prospect of helping the boats to rise in wards 7 and 8. And people on that end of the city have to see results also. We have a shopping center over there that people have been working on for 20 years to get done. Skyland Shopping Center. The city took the property several years ago by eminent domain and has now been tied up in litigation. And we've got to get that solved. I think when people start to see things happen in their own community that they want to have happen and feel a part of, it's going to make a difference in the outcomes. So again, I think continuing with aggressive education reform, continuing to build a workforce development system over the next couple of years, I think we'll start to see tangible results in the positive sense on the eastern end of the city.
Before we go to questions from the floor, I want to touch lightly on education, because I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that. One of the concerns heard during the mayoral campaign was that even people who didn't plan to vote for the incumbent mayor, in many cases, thought schools were moving in the right direction, and that was one area where things had improved. And I'm wondering what you're taking from the previous administration and carrying forward, and what Gray initiatives will look like from here on out.
Well, I was pleased to be able to be a supporter of education reform. Remember, I was the chair of the council of this city, and I chaired the committee of the whole in which education was included. And so I was pleased to be able to support education reform. There's no question that not every day that I agree with some of the ways it was being done, but I happen to be committed to moving forward with that. I happen to also be committed to I think we benefit mightily from having a robust charter movement and having a public education, traditional public education system. We now, I think we have, maybe other than New Orleans, we were talking about earlier, but they don't have a traditional public education approach anymore, to my knowledge. But I think other than New Orleans, we probably have the most robust charter movement in the nation. We now have between 29 and 30,000 students. 40% of our student population in the city is in charter schools. We have 45,000 plus in our traditional public schools. We have a public education enrollment now of about 75,000. Now, I want to continue on that path. I've said it many, many times, and there were people who it was amazing to me, and I didn't want to take umbrage at it, but I don't know how people got me disconnected from wanting to see education move forward in the District of Columbia. But that happened, and rather than take umbrage, I took the opportunity to go everywhere I could to talk about my own commitment. My commitment, however, transcends K through 12 and goes to a birth through 24 system. And one of the things I did that I'm extremely proud of is I did the legislation that made a commitment 3 years ago to universal pre-kindergarten services, that we would have a seat for every 3 and 4-year-old in an organized education program in the District of Columbia. Three approaches: traditional public schools, charter schools, and community-based organizations. We said we would do it in 6 years, and with that we would create higher education incentive grants, and that we would provide for the CBOs facility dollars so they could upgrade. Well, this effort has been so popular that it didn't take 6 years to get it done. We now, I believe, are the first city in America to say that we have a seat for every 3 and 4-year-old in the District of Columbia. And if you look at the enrollment data, when they will be released probably next week or the week after, the audited enrollment data. For the first time in decades, we will see an increase in public education enrollment in this city. Now, there are a number of reasons for that, but if you look at the data, you will see that the principal reason for it is the increase in the number of children who are 3 and 4 years old who are now in a formal education program. What does that do? The obvious is that it gets the kids at an earlier point and gives us a chance to close that achievement gap before it becomes a gap, getting these kids at a much earlier point. Secondly, it allows us to get very young parents, many of whom, frankly, have little of a clue about being an effective parent in the first place. It gets them in because obviously 3 and 4-year-olds are not going to go to school by themselves, and more often than not, parents will show up to get their kids in school. There are some who question the motives of parents, and I happen to start with a very positive motive, and that is, I think most parents want their children to do better, and to do better than they have done. And if they see a pathway to that, I think they will participate in it. Thirdly, it means we are getting the young parents generally in this city, and we are attracting them back. We are now north of 600,000 in terms of our population, and I think we are getting those kids back, and we have a chance to hold on to them. If you look at the last 3 years, now the enrollment is going up in the first grade. Now the enrollment is going up in the second grade. And what does that mean? It means the kids are starting to move through. The next critical point for us is what happens after middle school. Because a lot of folks are, in some cases, opting to not go to our middle schools and not go to our high schools. We have invested, the last administration, I was pleased to be a part of it. Alan Luke, who spearheaded that, is now the city administrator. We invested over $1 billion in renovating and rebuilding schools in the District of Columbia. And while that is now not synonymous with education in the sense of improved education, frankly, how you feel walking into a building really shapes your attitude about learning in the first place. So we have a chance to try to hang on to those kids and hang on to those families. I look at it as an investment in the future, and that is each year we ought to be able to hang on. The next year, hopefully the third grade enrollment will go up because we're hanging on to those kids. And by the time they get to the next point of demarcation in their educational lives, hopefully our schools will be better so that the parents are making the decision to keep their kids in a public education system in the District of Columbia. I want to do something else. And frankly, when we get to better times, and our fiscal situation is horrific at this point. We just closed a $188 million budget gap, and it is as much as $500 million for the next fiscal year. And that is to sit here, I don't want to sit here and suggest that there's not going to be some very significant pain associated with that, because there will. But we will get through that. One of the things I want to do is create robust infant and toddler programs. We're working now with a group called Educare. They are building a facility over in Parkside in Ward 7. They are going to invest dollars with us. I just had a meeting with them myself a few weeks ago in which we talked about how to roll this out. It will be they will have 7 classrooms for pre-K, 7 classrooms for infants and toddlers. But even more importantly, I think, is we will learn best practices. There will be an R&D program for us to learn how to replicate this across the city. And frankly, I don't think we need to look at just traditional education dollars to fund these kind of programs. I don't want to get into some arcane discussion about Medicaid, because I'm sure the eyes will start to glaze over on that one. But there are ways in which you can utilize the Medicaid program. There's something called early periodic screening, diagnostic, and treatment component of Medicaid that helps you intervene with very young children if they are at risk of having a developmental problem. And there are many kids, by virtue of where they are growing up in this city, are at risk of that. Because if you look at the special education data, you will see that there's a disproportionately high incidence of special education use in certain parts of the city. We're looking at how we may use those Medicaid dollars in order to be able to expand those programs. The other thing I will mention is that where we've got a lot of work to do is on the special education front. It is unbelievable. I don't know how many of you all follow this, but it's unbelievable how much money we spend. And I'm not talking about special education within DCPS or within charters. On non-public tuition, that means kids who we put into private schools for whom we are obligated to pay. Last year, 2,800 kids cost us $160 million. The transportation in special education, that includes transporting kids to those programs as well as DCPS and charters, another $93 million. $250 million. And we're working now to start to reform that. We want to make sure that we have inclusive programs. What that means in this instance is that children with a disability have an opportunity in an appropriate fashion to interact with children who don't have a disability. But it's got to cost us less. And what I want to see us do is reinvest those dollars as we realize those savings over the next several years back into education and, frankly, back into early childhood education, because that is one of the best special education prevention programs that we could possibly operate.
It's interesting that you segued right from schools into a structural deficit, because the District of Columbia Chamber of Commerce puts the cost of having an ill-prepared workforce annually to the tax base at $107 million a year. That's because people are low-paid workers instead of higher-paid workers. Mm-hmm. That's taxes that we're not collecting. That's not raw income. It's a tremendous statistic, really. Questions from the floor, please.
Sir, I'm Bill Coleman.
I know you are. Thank you for being here.
Thought about the other, that if the decision had been made to say that the federal government should be located in a special district and the Defense Department, everybody else had to be here, what that would have done in terms of you're trying to say. Because it just seems to me there's so many things goes on in the world, and I'm pretty sure the average kid in the D.C. school system doesn't get exposed to. Whereas if there's father and mother worked in the Defense Department, and there was a special educational division for them, perhaps they would get exposed to.
Yeah, I don't think we take effective advantage of the federal presence from that perspective here in the city. It's amazing to me, even in 2011, how many kids who live in the eastern end of this city haven't even been downtown, haven't been exposed to these opportunities. So I think on the plus side, that is a tremendous opportunity that is available to us. And I think you still could, at the end of the day, carve out a presence for the residents of the District of Columbia, have a federal presence, not violate the the spirit or intent of either, and still have those educational opportunities. I'll be honest with you, somebody who grew up in the city, I probably took less advantage of going down to the, to the Congress and going down to the museums and all of those things because they were right there. And they had a different significance for me than somebody who was coming to the District of Columbia, because it's the nation's capital, a class trip or whatever the case may be. So even today, I don't think we take full advantage of it, and I think you're absolutely right. I assume you're making the case for what a special enrichment opportunity we have for our children as a result of the federal presence being here.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for joining us today. Like you, I'm a native Washingtonian. Like you, I'm a champion for education, for workforce and economic development. But on the cab ride over, the cabbie asked me to deliver a message from the business community to help us unshackle business and make it an easier place to do business in the district. And then I think we can contribute as a business community to that rising tide. What are your plans to make it easier to do business in the district?
Yeah, I think first of all, one of the things we've done is recruit some outstanding people. I don't know how many of you know Victor Hoskins. Victor is the new deputy mayor for planning and economic development and really has been lauded, not only in the city, but around the region for his leadership and his creativity. So I think first and foremost, getting people into place who understand that. Dr. Rochelle Webb, who's now the director of DOES. Antonio Hunter, who I've now hired to be in to head the Department of Small Local Business Development. Having a deputy mayor approach that says, listen, you guys are coordinators not only with the agencies in your clusters, but you've got to reach across these clusters and recognize the inextricable relationships that have to exist there. One of the agencies, frankly, that is in in Deputy Mayor Hoskins' cluster is DCRA, and it has often been an impediment. And one of the things we are working on now is creating a one-stop licensing and permitting center, which is the bane of the existence of so many people who try to do business in the District of Columbia. And frankly, getting out. I'm a person who believes very strongly in a collaborative approach, and that the answers don't necessarily all exist within government. And by giving people an opportunity in the business community to help us with the solutions, one, we'll get a richer set of ideas, and secondly, I think we'll get a higher level of investment personally in those solutions. So, and then the cab drivers in particular, I think, have been shackled. I just unshackled one thing for them, and that was they had a ceiling of $19 on what they could charge no matter where they went in the city. And I've issued a mayor's order now to relieve them from that bondage. And there will be other things that we will do for the taxi cab industry in the city as we go along as well. And I realize that's a narrow sliver of business in the city, but they were more active in this last election than I've ever seen the taxi cab industry in the District of Columbia.
You made it pretty clear they wanted your attention.
They got it, too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next. Yes, sir.
Again, thank you for being here, Mr. Mayor, and for sharing your vision for the city. Thank you. My name is Garth Ross. I'm with the Kennedy Center here for the Performing Arts, and we're just about to announce in our season announcement coming up shortly the first ever Kennedy Center Festival that will take place actually out in the city. It's a street arts festival, and we're working very closely in the planning of the festival with the D.C. Office of Planning so that we align with the economic development goals, the creative capital, that sort of that sort of work that's already been done and that master plan that they already have in place. My question for you is that you've spoken to the relationship between economic development and education. Do you see a relationship between economic development and arts and culture?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
No question. As a matter of fact, that's why the Arts and Humanities Commission is in the Economic Development Cluster, and that's why I intend to keep it there. Victor and I had a discussion 2 days ago about the next director. I participated. I participated in a meeting recently where we talked extensively about the economic engine that the arts and the performing arts, the fine arts, and other cultural activities, the contribution that they make to the city. I think it is an economic engine because there's so much revenue generated as a result of having that presence, but it's also what helps to define a city as great. You look at great cities, and people will characteristically, in defining what makes them great, they will talk about their commitment to the arts. They will talk about their commitment to having a diversity, a panoply of arts opportunities in the city. And I'm delighted that we have the arena stage, the new arena stage there, the Kennedy Center, obviously, the Harmon Theater, the Shakespeare Theater, and again, as we talk about exposing our young people, each of them, including the Kennedy Center in particular, each has reached out to make sure that there were youth opportunities that were created. So I think it's an economic engine, it's an educational engine, and it's an engine that allows us to define our city as a place where people want to come. I think as we pitch our city, and this is where it connects again to economic development, when we pitch our city to people who are having national or international meetings, to be able to talk about these rich opportunities is an important selling point to convince people that they ought to come to the nation's capital. We have an outstanding convention center at this stage. We are now moving to build the Convention Center Hotel, which will expand our sleeping capacity in this city. But to be able to say to people, here's a rich set of opportunities that you can enjoy as a part of being here for whatever your meeting is absolutely fantastic. We have a meeting coming next year. The International AIDS Conference is coming to the District of Columbia next year. We expect to have 22,000 participants in that conference. And that, again, I think will help us to market the city, help people see who we are. And to be honest with you, I want to use it as an opportunity to educate people as well around the plight, to go back to this earlier discussion around the plight that we experience in the District of Columbia. I was talking to one of my staff the other day, and he raised the question of why don't we have in the hotel rooms a little video, the mayor welcoming people to the city and talk about what it means to have taxation without representation. When you go into a hotel room, you now can watch the video to greet you. You can see it about 943 times for those of you who've been in hotels recently. But virtually by definition, anybody watching that is somebody who's a visitor to the city.
Who's next?
Can we go back to education and the process of Kaya Henderson and the interim schools chancellor, and where you stand with that, and what you hope the new schools chancellor, whoever she or he may be, will do?
Well, first of all, I happen to think a lot of Kaya Henderson. She stepped in as the interim role when Michelle Rhee left, and one of the things I wanted to do, because I knew her before, she was actually in the city even before 2007, and she knows a lot about education, to say the least, and she also has a way of relating effectively to people. She has a collaborative spirit, and I wanted to give her some time to be able to help people know who she was, who didn't know her, and we've now reached that point. As we were talking about earlier, the legislation in the city requires that there be a panel that advises me on the qualities and the characteristics and so on and so forth that they believe a chancellor ought to have. I've now appointed that panel. The two people chairing it are Michael Lomax and Catherine Bradley, who chaired my Education Transition Committee. That committee is actually meeting tonight, and I'm not looking for a protracted process. If they can finish it in one meeting, I'd love to have that happen, but it won't be more than 2 meetings. And I've made it clear to people that Kaya is somebody who I'm very interested in seeing in that job. She's even offered to go meet with the panel while they are convened. And frankly, what I expect from a chancellor is to continue with education reform, to recognize the inextricable relationships with those elements of education that precede kindergarten and that come after the 12th grade. One of the things I've said to our deputy mayor, Deshaun Wright, who came from New York, and Newark has a charter background and has a traditional public school background, is that he has got to be the guy who uniquely brings the elements together. That if you look at his direct reports, there aren't a lot of them, but if you look beyond that and see he's got the university, he's got the community college, he's got the charter schools, and he's got the CBOs that are involved in community, in early childhood education. His job is to bring those folks together. So I want to see an environment within which we recognize that all boats will not rise as high as they can unless all of these elements work effectively together. And at the heart of that, frankly, has to be a chancellor who recognizes the responsibility for K through 12, is perfectly prepared to work collegially and cooperatively with the charter movement, as well as the other elements in public education in the city.
Do you see a blurring of the distinction between charter and district-run schools?
It hasn't happened, and I'm not sure it will. One of the things I think we can do to facilitate that, to the extent that that's a positive, one of the things we can do to facilitate that is co-location, because we do have a number of buildings still in this city that are not fully occupied. And rather than have charters go out and float bonds, which they do, and then the taxpayers wind up paying for those buildings, we ought to look at them co-locating in the same building with traditional public schools. And I think there's a natural educational affinity relationship there, where hopefully what will happen, there will be interaction between the two groups of people around best practices. I think from the governance perspective, there are clear lines. Each charter school is its own local education agency. The governance model for traditional public schools is much more centrally managed. You know, we don't have a board of education anymore, but it is still a central governance model where the D.C. Public Schools is one LEA. Every charter school is its own LEA. We have, I think, 53 charter schools now and 53 LEAs. They're on 99 campuses. So I think there will probably always be some fairly significant distinctions between the two, but where the distinctions should not exist is when it comes to how we educate our children in terms of sharing best practices.
Yes, sir.
Corey?
Mayor Gray, how are you?
Fine. How are you, Corey?
Wait for the mic.
ANC Commissioner for Ward 5, and last night I attended at the Wilson Building the conversation about Walmart coming into the city. Are you prepared to talk about your support or disapproval of Walmart coming into the city, given some of the challenges we have around job readiness and the critical need to be able to hire people with low skills, perhaps, in the district? It's a very spirited conversation, particularly about the locations of some of those Walmart stores and about living wages and such. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think in some instances they could probably do it as a matter of right. But I think they're also wise enough to realize that if they don't have a relationship with the city, it'll be a far less positive experience than it otherwise might be. We have started conversations with them. One of the things I've charged Victor with doing is sitting down with them. I've looked at, for example, the benefits agreement that was struck with the city of Chicago. At least they negotiated for years, from what I can gather. I don't know if it was ever signed in this Pullman area of Chicago. We're looking at, one, the importance of having a wage, a competitive wage, having benefits that are associated with it, is what has made, I think, Walmart anathema, frankly, to so many people in organized labor around the country. I think they're taking a different approach at this stage, and we look forward to working with them as a part of taking that different approach. They are investing a lot already now in charitable organizations in the District of Columbia. And frankly, it would bring with it, for us, it would bring a number of construction jobs, which obviously are temporary, but it would bring probably, between 1,000 and 2,000 permanent jobs to the District of Columbia, as well as having the effect of bringing an additional amenity to a number of our communities. We've been talking to them about the possibility of locating in Skyland, which is the shopping center I was talking about earlier. They would be a great anchor tenant, assuming we can work through some of these other issues. But I have detected a desire to be here, and a spirit of willingness to work with us. Now, we will see how that works out. Now, I know they've proposed 4 locations in the District of Columbia, and there's one of those locations where there's been enormous resistance to that. And, I was asked about this recently, and I hope that they can work that through with that community. But if they don't, then let's look at another area of the city, assuming, again, that we can have competitive wages with benefits associated with it, which I think we can. Costco has figured out how to do that. Target has figured out how to do that. So there's no reason why a similar retailer shouldn't be able to figure out how to do that as well. And frankly, on the plus side, going back to the leverage of being the District of Columbia, we are the nation's capital, and companies do want to be in the nation's capital. And I would think they'd want to be able to strike a relationship with us that they can use as an example and have it emulated across the country.
Well, SEIU is right across the circle. What kind of shot would they have at talking to Walmart workers?
I don't know. I guess SEIU will have to decide that.
It's a follow-up on your question. In negotiating with Walmart, can you negotiate that all of the workers need to be residents from the district?
We can certainly, we have a law called First Source in the city, which I've now issued a mayor's order on, and we're working to put some teeth into it. Basically, the First Source law, I don't know if you're familiar with it, the First Source law says that if you have a contract with the District of Columbia, that 51% of the new hires have to be people who live in the District of Columbia. It's got more holes than Swiss cheese, to be honest with you. Because people who have multifaceted companies, oftentimes they will simply move folks from other parts of their operation to these jobs and then backfill with other folks, in the jobs that they were vacated. In addition to that, the compliance has been spotty, and the approach has been entirely punitive. And that is, if you don't do this, this is the hammer that we will hit you over the head with. We have just sent out letters to 22 companies who are in non-compliance. But we're now looking at an approach that says, okay, we have to have that approach, but what about creating an incentive system that says if you do certain things, if you hire district residents, which we know the money will redound to the benefit of the city, you will get certain rewards for that. And we are going to probably issue in about a week to 10 days an approach that will expand on First Source. I simply say that to say that I think that there is a basis then for finding a way to encourage them to hire district residents. And as you talk about a community benefits agreement, that certainly is one of the provisions that could be included in that agreement. And frankly, what then becomes incumbent on us is if they make that commitment, we've got to say that we have an employment services department that is prepared to train these people for the jobs. Because if we don't have a pipeline, we then invite people to say, listen, we made this commitment, we're not finding the people, they're not in the pipeline, so we need to go out to Maryland and Virginia and other places to hire folks because we have to run our business. And I think that's where you get the nexus, frankly, between a commercial business coming to the city and the role of the city, not so much in having created the jobs, but created the opportunity for people who live in the city to have those jobs.
Yes.
I'm Jenny Niles from E.L. Haynes, and I've usually
I know you well.
where I've been testifying, so you're in the hot seat. I was just wanting, and perhaps I should already know the answer, but I'm given the opportunity to ask you, is with the budget crisis, what ability is there for the city to revisit the teacher's contract with the WTU?
I don't think there's much of any. I think there was a commitment made. And remember, even though it was just entered into, we're actually in the fourth year of 5 years now. because 3 years were retroactive. And also remember that a lot of the incentives associated with that contract were advanced, were awarded by private foundations that saw this as an incentive system. So I don't know that that's going to be revisited, to tell you the truth. Simply put.
Yes.
Mayor Gray, my name's Ivan Gaviria. I'm actually here representing the Greater Washington Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We're celebrating 35 years this year with a gala. However, I'm also here to represent the small business community in general. And you actually said something interesting when you were discussing the St. E's campus as far as retail perhaps not going directly on the campus, forcing people that work there out into the small business community in that area. Is that something that is going to be kind of citywide? Are we looking at some kind of a retail paradigm shift, or is that just specific to that area? Because
it's unique to that. It's unique to this particular project, but I think we can learn from it. Let me move it to somewhere else to go directly to your question, and that is we've got Walter Reed also that presents opportunities for, as a result of BRAC, Walter Reed is closing. 62 acres of that property is being turned over to the District of Columbia. The site itself is being redeveloped as a mixed-use property. Office, residential, retail, a variety of options. So there's certainly a chance for small business to go in there, which I think makes a lot of sense. But also, we now have an approach. I don't know if you all have followed it. We do small area plans for these major developments. And the small area plans typically look outside of the development itself. The small area plan for the Walter Reed area looks outside onto Georgia Avenue and other areas in the surrounding community in order to look at how folks would like to see that developed. And just to show you how the thinking is now evolving, we recognize, too, that these transportation systems have a huge role to play in being able to use opportunities like this. We have, I wish it were tomorrow, but it's not, we have on the drawing board a streetcar line that would come to Georgia Avenue. The stimulus effect they would have for economic development is tremendous, and that's been shown in Portland. I don't know how many people have seen the Portland system. They've been at streetcars now for about, 10 or 12 years. But they have this area called the Pearl District that was a blight, undeveloped, and they credit the streetcars with having rejuvenated that area and being responsible for about $8.5 billion of economic development. So I think when you look at the small area plans now, they are beginning to look broadly at the opportunities that exist. So it isn't just Walter Reed, the property of Walter Reed. It is the surrounding community and the transportation modalities that have to exist in order to be able to support and facilitate the growth of those areas. So Homeland Security may be the first opportunity, but it is not unique to that. The thinking is not unique to that. Frankly, if these projects do nothing for the community, it's just a tremendously lost situation. We've seen situations where, where something developed. I mean, frankly, St. Elizabeth's Hospital, of course, was built in the 19th century, but it is the quintessential enclave. They had 7,000 patients at St. Elizabeth's Hospital at its peak back in the 60s, and it had everything there. They even had a farm. They had a shoemaker. They had everything self-contained there. One, because they felt that the patients were people who would never go back into the community again, or if they did, not a lot of them would. And then secondly, it was a place for the staff to be able to do whatever they did right there on the campus. It was viewed as a convenience. I think we have a different look at this stage, and that is these need to be catalysts for the surrounding community. Otherwise, it is an under-realized chance.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, this is anecdotal, but I have a number of friends and colleagues who've reported getting jaywalking tickets in recent weeks, and I wonder if that indicates a broader sort of broken windows approach to public safety in the district, or if you could talk anything about your approach in that regard.
No, I didn't know we were giving more jaywalking tickets, to tell you the truth. We could certainly use the revenue. But, you know, I talk to Chief Lanier, for example, almost every day. And I can tell you, we have not had a conversation at any point about jaywalking and the issues of tickets. I would suggest people stop jaywalking.
That's the headline out of this section. Let's go back to the sit-down restaurant situation in the 7th Ward, because I thought that was a really graspable example of what a lack of development in a local neighborhood really means to people who live there and would like to take a walk and have dinner. If I'm a restaurateur in a mid-range restaurant, nothing fancy, nothing specifically designed to take care of conventioneers and visiting dignitaries, but just a neighborhood joint, what's the role of the city in getting me to look at that neighborhood instead of taking the low-hanging fruit in an empty storefront on Wisconsin Avenue, where the rent's going to be higher, but also I have a reasonable expectation that there are more diners as well?
Well, I think one of the roles we play is creating a customer base, and that's what Homeland Security is about. We're creating a customer base that otherwise wouldn't exist. And of course, we're not doing that by ourselves because the federal government is working with us on that. But let's look at another example, and that is the Department of Employment Services now has a brand new office building that was just opened in December. Several hundred employees on Minnesota Avenue. And what's interesting is the restaurant that opened is right down the street from that. It's called Raise the Steaks, and the food is actually quite good. So I think we can help by creating the customer base. I think the day of having a cluster of government agencies all kind of in one area of the city, again, it may work from a communication perspective, even though I don't think we need that kind of communication anymore with technology being what it is. But I think that day is over. I think the dispersion, if you will, dispersal of the agencies then becomes an economic catalyst. It becomes a way of stimulating the economy in those areas. I'll tell you what else that happens too. If you go over and look at what's going on around St. Elizabeth's Hospital now, there's a new housing development that is emerging right there on Howard Road, Sheridan, which was a long-time public housing development that was raised, and now there's a new mixed-income housing development with rental properties developing there. And you know what will happen? If we do this right, some of the people who work in Homeland Security will move there. They will move into these developments, and that will be a catalyst for additional residential development. So I think if we can create the customer base, and in some cases provide incentives, but not in all cases. You know, we have TIFs, we have tax increment financing that we've provided to some projects because it helps to... Everybody know what a TIF is? Everybody care what a TIF is? Simply put, it says that if we do this, there's new tax revenue that will be created that otherwise wouldn't be there without this. Therefore, if we do this, why don't we take some of that tax revenue and plow it back in at an early point to get people to do this in the first place? That makes sense? Yeah. So we do provide tax increment financing for purposes of being a catalytic agent as well. But I think we have so many positive factors about this city that we don't need to do that in all cases. You know, I have this goal. You know, for those of you who've been to Europe, you've probably been to London. You know, and they have the Thames River, which is a unifying part of London. You go to Paris, and there's the Seine, and it's a unifying, element in Paris. We have the Anacostia River, which is perceived as a dividing entity in the city. I want to use that river as a unifying point, that people see, that we're working to clean up the river at this stage, and, start to see it as a part of our cultural, one of our huge cultural assets in the city, and rather than seeing it as east of the river, when you say east of the river here, it has a certain set of connotations, that it becomes a unifying asset for the District of Columbia. We obviously have got to work to clean it up. We're working to do that. We have a bag tax that we're using the money from to help clean that up. We're working, by the way, with our regional partners as well in Maryland, Montgomery and Prince George's County, to be able to do that as well. But I want to see us become, a city that is 8 wards and not just 6. And I think that is a huge selling point in getting people to come here in the first place, in addition to what we see now as the catalytic agents, the catalytic engines that we can use.
Yes.
I have a suggestion and a question. I'm Septime Weber, Director of
the
Washington Ballet.
Mm-hmm.
Nice to see you, Mr. Mayor. The suggestion is that if you want to ensure more restaurants open in Ward 7, ensure that the arts community is flourishing in Ward 7. I mean, quite simply, we can see that's the case downtown with Harmon Center and the effect of the arts there. Arena Stage is helping that neighborhood, et cetera. It's certainly a great model. So the question then is, in better economic times, the city was able to invest quite a bit of money in the arts, both in big capital, helping with capital projects like the ones you mentioned earlier, but also in kind of the daily delivering of services through the commission. And because of the economic downturn, there's less money available, certainly from the city. On top of that, the president's new budget proposes a reduction by 50% of the direct funds from the federal government to over 20 organizations in the district. Do you see the situation changing soon so that some additional investment can be envisioned, as things get better in the city?
It will change. I don't know that I would put soon on it. I think we're going to be in this for a couple of years. We've been in it longer already than I think people thought. We've called this a recession. I guess for not wanting to, engage in the discussion of a depression, because that has a certain set of connotations associated with it as well. But we're in the 3rd year of this. We now start to define success as stop the hemorrhaging. And that is not what we would want to see success be. We want to see us beginning to start to throw off additional dollars as the definition of success. So I think as we return, I certainly support these kinds of investments. If you go back and look at my time as the Ward 7 council member, one of the things that I spearheaded when I was a Ward 7 member was the development of a Ward 7 Arts Collaborative. And we got money invested in that because we had a lot of individuals and little organizations out there that were struggling to try to do good work. And I got them some money to be able to come together. And they don't have a lot of money, but they still are functioning. And they are as a group. And they're still doing rather well, even though there's been an economic downturn and they've lost some of the funding that they had. I realized from my own experience the benefit that derives from that. And again, the richness that it adds to a community, and therefore making a community more livable as a result of it. So the short answer is yes. One of the things that we did also that I was proud to be a part of was the rejuvenation of what was called Watts Branch Park. We now have renamed it Marvin Gaye Park and have created that kind of amenity. And if you go and look at Marvin Gaye Park, there's an amphitheater in there where there are summer concerts and summer activities now being provided to the people who live there. The other thing that we're doing as well, and I was over there last week, is H.D. Woodson High School is being rebuilt in Ward 7. It will be a STEM school in part. It will be a community school as well. And as a part of it being a community school, it ought to be a place, and in the way, if you go see it, and I hope you will, it really ought to be a place where we promote the arts, the performing arts in particular, as well. And the school will be ready by September. It will be opening for the next school year. And it is absolutely extraordinary. And what a great statement to make to a community, that we think enough of you to build a new school, a school that you can be proud of, a school that you can be proud to send your children to and to have your community activities in.
Well, Mayor, since we're ending in part on an arts-related theme, you're a dancer yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, some days. Well, hand dancing.
Well, explain what hand dancing is.
That's a difficult thing to explain. It is a dance that has endured the test of time. It is an art form, in my opinion. And the worst things that somebody trying to learn it can do is to look at the upper torso of somebody. Because people have so many artistic turns and twists that you will be absolutely confused, after about 2 minutes of watching this. But if you look at the lower torso, very basic steps to a beat of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I would invite everybody to become a part of hand dancing, and let's rejuvenate it in the District of Columbia.
And that is a D.C. born and bred art form, right?
D.C. born and bred, that's exactly right. One of our signature accomplishments in the District of Columbia, of which we are mightily proud.
Well, please thank Mayor Gray for being with us.
Thank Ray. Good job, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
All right. Thank you all very much for having me.
I think anybody's got 3 blackberries sitting in front of them. What is that, for the city, for the federal, and for the district level?
One is devoted solely to public safety.
Oh.
When the police chief needs to get me, she can call me on that phone, and I know it's the police chief.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's always exciting news when you get that call, right?
And the family gets one, and then the rest of the world gets one.
Then the rest of the city, yeah. I mean, look at this.
I know, that's great.
I feel like I'm wearing the ammo belt.
Thanks for that kind. Feel good to see you. Great to see you. Thanks for coming.